Now that we understand the makeup of a timeline, we can discuss how to alter it. There are many alterations that can be made, but generally they fall into two categories: those that cause branching timelines and those that do not, or in other words, macro and micro changes. Let us first focus on micro or non-branching changes. Two of the three ways these changes can arise are due to the creation of a timeless or the intervention of an enigma. The creation of a timeless occurs when an individual enters a time gate for the first time. Their past is removed from the timeline. Similarly, when an enigma encounters a non-timeless on a timeline, they also remove them from the timeline. However, while entering a time gate recreates the individual on the meta-timeline, an enigma erases them completely. Despite these radically different outcomes for the individual, the effects on the timeline are virtually identical. In both cases, the individual is removed with the minimum amount of changes to the resulting timeline. Recall that there are infinite timelines nearly identical to the real one, but merely suppressed by the time gate network. When an individual is removed from a timeline, the time gates search for an appropriate new timeline from those infinite possibilities. Because there are infinite options, there is guaranteed to be one that is identical, save for the presence of the removed individual. Technically, the time gates do not select the timeline with only that change. If that were the case, they could select a timeline where everyone the removed individual met simply hallucinated everything that he or she had done. Instead, the time gates make a compromise selection in which they balance minimal changes with maximal probability. Thus, when an individual is removed, no timeline with an absurd quantity of hallucinations is produced to replace it. Many struggle to understand or to accept how a person can be removed from time without causing major changes to the timeline. There are several ways in which this happens. The most common is by simply eliminating minor interactions and replacing major interactions with interactions involving other individuals. To help you understand, let's create a hypothetical example. There is a man named John. John is about to become a timeless. In John's life on his native timeline, he, among other things, stopped his friend Tom from making a bad investment, frequently talked to Nancy at the bus stop when she had no one else in her life, gives some of his old furniture to Frank, and introduced future spouses Sarah and Joe. John then steps through a time gate and becomes a timeless. He is removed from the past and present of his timeline. The time gates select a new timeline with the following changes. Tom is now prevented from making a bad investment by his other friend, Bill. Another person at the bus stop, Bob, is now the one to talk to Nancy. Frank simply finds some cheap furniture to buy and makes fewer purchases on non-essentials. Sarah and Joe meet through a chance encounter now rather than an introduction. Some additional minor changes may be required to smooth out these changes, but this is entirely possible. Remember, there are infinite alternate possible timelines that the timegate network can choose from, so there are always possibilities. If John instead encountered Enigma before becoming a timeless, the same changes would be employed. The only difference is that John would not become a timeless. He would simply cease to exist. In contrast, if John stepped through a time gate, while his old life would cease to exist, he would be recreated as a timeless on the meta-timeline. Again, the meta-timeline will be discussed further in a later chapter. At this point, it's worth explicitly stating that a timeless is an individual who has gone through a time gate and reconstituted on the meta-timeline. They are the only ones capable of doing so, and they no longer exist on their native timelines. They also have a few other unique properties which will be discussed in later chapters. They are otherwise human, but with a unique relationship to the timelines. There is one other important note regarding Enigmas and Timeless. Enigmas cannot clip Timeless the way they do with normal denizens of the timelines. However, Timeless should not underestimate the dangers of an Enigma. In some respects, they are equally dangerous to a Timeless, perhaps even more so. They are capable of trapping and mentally assaulting a Timeless, driving them to insanity. Timeless trapped by Enigmas rarely recover from such a fate. Timeless who encounter an Enigma who clips an inhabitant of a timeline will be transported with the Enigma onto the new, real timeline. Timeless who have witnessed such clipping events often report feeling a physical sensation as they are transported to the new timeline. This effect appears to be localized to a relatively small area around the clipping event. At this point, many ask what an enigma is and what their origins are. Unfortunately, Timepiece has limited information on enigmas due to their extreme threat. Enigmas are capable of entering or exiting timelines, remaining undetectable and invulnerable until they strike. They are mechanical beings with 5 manipulator tentacles and round main bodies, to our best observation. Their main body is hidden by a black drape, often ragged in appearance. Their origins are completely unknown. However, they often appear near arcane tech, such as inactive time gates. Based on this, it is theorized that enigmas are some sort of defense system intended to prevent unauthorized individuals from accessing future tech. However, the erratic behavior of enigmas has cast doubt on this hypothesis. In addition to the micro-changes made through the creation of Timeless and clipping by the enigmas, there are macro-changes. These are, of course, the creation of branching timelines at flashpoints. Flashpoints form the basis of many of our conflicts with Anarachia. Flashpoints are critical moments in a timeline where significant and immediate change is linked to a single event. Note those 3 key aspects which make up a flashpoint. Flashpoints are potential timeline alterations which have the following characteristics. 1. Likely change. A potential alteration to a timeline already has to be particularly likely. For instance, a critical decision by a world leader where that world leader may be swayed to either one of 2 plausible options. There must be 2 potential timelines of nearly equal probability. 2. Significant change. The potential alteration would result in widespread changes across the parallel Earth. These changes should affect a large percentage of the global population. This requirement for widespread change may be the reason why so many flashpoints are concentrated in the 20th and 21st centuries. It was the earliest time of rapid global communication. 3. Immediate change. The alteration's effect must not only be widespread, but take effect at scale shortly after its inception. Subtle alterations, which will vastly alter the world within the next 100 years, will not constitute a flashpoint. Instead of splitting a timeline as with a flashpoint, such slow-acting changes will merely alter the timeline. A moment on a timeline where all 3 of these criteria are met is considered to be a flashpoint. As alluded to, actions by a timeless during a flashpoint could result in the creation of another timeline. Since there are 2 potential and very likely timelines, a timeless need only alter events to occur in the slightly less likely direction in order to create an alternate timeline. For example, let us assume that in the predicted natural timeline, a world leader is tempted to suddenly declare war. This war would quickly involve much of the world, whether they would participate in it or merely react to it by shuffling their defenses and so on. Despite immense personal temptation, the leader eventually decides against it. This moment of decision is a flashpoint. Knowing that a flashpoint is approaching, an Anarachian timeless attempts to position themselves to convince the leader to follow through and declare war. Naturally, timepiece agents would be dispatched to stop him. But for our example, let us assume the Anarakian succeeds. The leader declares war and the world changes. As a result, the Timegate network is conflicted. The actual, more probable path is that the timeline continues without a declaration of war. However, an agent acting from outside of this timeline has intervened and unquestionably altered events. The events cannot be reconciled. Their consequences are too great and immediate. The actions of the timeless can also not be ignored. As a result, the network is forced to accept these changes to the timeline while also attempting to maintain the original version. The result is that the changes are shunted into a new secondary timeline. The network preserves the original timeline where there was peace. However, it also creates a second timeline where there is war. Both timelines become real. In the process of creating the second timeline, a few other notable events take place. First, a new present is established on the timeline. This is more notable when flashpoints are exploited through trips to the past, which will be discussed later. For now, simply note that the moment on a timeline when a flashpoint is exploited to create a second timeline will become the present position of the timegates on that second timeline. Second, the physical locations of the various timegates will shift with the creation of a new timeline. They will only shift on the new timeline, and the reason is unknown. There also seems to be little pattern as to where the timegates will relocate themselves on the globe. It is worth noting that there is a theoretical upper limit to the number of timelines that the Timegate network can sustain. Each division makes the network slightly less stable, as probabilities are divided among more and more timelines. Fortunately, while no concrete number on the maximum possible timelines has been agreed on, it is agreed that the network is not yet near this point. This is a credit to the work of our agents, who have successfully prevented several flashpoint exploitations by Anarakia. While a strategic rather than technical concern, it is worth reminding agents that the overall goal of Timepiece is to prevent timeline splits. The decision to create a new timeline to one's specifications is a decision too great for anyone to make. Additionally, Anarakia's creation of multiple timelines is for the express purpose of exploiting those worlds and giving power to the ruling Anarachs.